everybody, thanks for joining another video. I'm Michelle Crawford, and today we're going to be talking about everything you need to get started with watercolor. If you're joining us from YouTube, don't forget to check out the Watercolor for Real Beginners Facebook group. To get started with watercolor, you might think you need a lot of items, but really, there's just some basic supplies we're going to cover. The first thing you're going to need is paint. Don't go crazy with paint. There's a lot of really expensive paints out there. There's also a lot of really inexpensive and poor quality paints, but you don't need to spend a lot of money. But I recommend getting a basic set. This one is the Winsor Newton Cotman Watercolor Series. Winsor Newton is a great brand. The Cotman is not their professional type of paint, but it is a fantastic brand, and you're going to get really great results with this. And this is just a little travel palette, but really any decent paint will do. Here's a brand called Sennelier, also pretty inexpensive. And you can see they come with, about 8 to 10 colors, and usually you're going to get some type of a palette in the lid. If you got a set of paints that doesn't have a palette, you might just grab a white dish or a palette from your art store. But don't go too cheap on your paints, but again, you don't need to spend a ton of money. Winsor Newton Cotman Series is one of my favorite brands. You're also going to need some watercolor paper. There's lots of different types of watercolor paper. Again, very expensive paper, things like Arches, but you really don't need to spend all that much money. I do recommend you make sure that the watercolor paper you get does have some amount of cotton in the paper. That's going to help absorb more water, and water is really important for watercolor. So if you want to do a lot of the wet on wet techniques where you have colors blending and bleeding on your paper, you need to have some cotton content. I believe this is Bee watercolor paper, B-E-E, like the insect. But this is one of my favorite kind of budget brands. It's not 100% cotton, but it does have some cotton pulp in it. And also make sure that your watercolor paper is at least 140 pound or 300 GSM. That refers to the thickness of the paper. And so watercolor paper should be thick enough that we're not going to get a ton of warping when we paint on it with water. So that's really basic about paint and paper. You're also going to need some brushes. And really you don't need a ton of brushes. You don't need, 20 different sizes. We typically with watercolor use round brushes, and you just need, a small, a medium, and a large brush. So this is the Princeton Snap brushes. These are really great for beginners. These are also pretty inexpensive. Probably can find them at your craft store or online. I also have another brand that I like. If you do shop online, Craftimo also makes us a watercolor brush, or these round brushes that very similar in price to the Princeton, but these are made of bamboo handles, and they're cruelty free, but another budget friendly brush that I really like to have. You're also going to want to have some type of a towel or paper towel. I like to use a towel that I can reuse. You're going to want to use this to dab water off your brush. And it's also nice to have some paper towels handy, and I kind of trim them into smaller pieces, but there will be times where you might want to, dab up some water, excess water, or maybe some paint that is in the wrong place. So having some paper towels around is going to be helpful. There are going to be plenty of times when you're painting with watercolor and you want to get the whole surface wet. And so to prevent our paper from warping while we do that, it's important to tape it down. So you'll see watercolor artists tape their paper around the edge down to their table or some type of a surface. But all you really need is some type of masking tape or painter's tape. This here is 3M gentle surface or delicate surface painter's tape. This is kind of what I started using when I began my journey with watercolor. I also like this tape here, Holbein soft tape. You can find this online. I kind of discovered it through a company called Let's Make Art, but again, it's just really masking tape. The reason why I like this tape is that it's really gentle to pull off your paper, and you're not going to kind of tear your paper when you remove it. A lot of times when we're doing watercolor, we may want to do a sketch on our paper, but you also want to be able to lighten it up so that you're not going to see it through translucent watercolor. So I do recommend a pencil. Honestly, any type will do. If you are buying an art pencil, most artists will recommend HB. It's just the number on the pencil really just talks about how hard or soft the lead is. So HB, it's going to go on dark enough that you can see, and it's going to be soft enough that you're able to remove it with an eraser. So make sure you have some type of an eraser. This is just your regular kind of gum eraser. If you do stop into your craft store, I do recommend maybe looking for something called a kneaded eraser. So a kneaded eraser is eraser material and it's malleable. So it's kind of like putty or Play-Doh or clay. And so what's nice about this is you can just kind of press into your paper and like remove some of the graphite on top, and it makes it really helpful for lightening certain areas. And then if it gets dirty, you just kind of roll it around in your hand and knead it back together, and you can use it over and over again. And then of course for watercolor, the last thing you're gonna need is water. So I've got 2 jars of water here. Typically I like to have a clean jar and a dirty jar. You obviously wanna rinse paint off your brush when you're switching colors, but there's also gonna be different watercolor techniques where maybe you wanna start with some clean water or drop in some clean water. So I try to keep at least 2. Some artists will use one to rinse off their warm colors and cool colors, but totally up to you. I always like to keep some extra jars around as well, just in case I muddy up my clean water. So those are all the supplies that you really are gonna need. And now to demonstrate how we use most of these things, we're gonna do something that I recommend doing anytime you get a new set of paints. We're going to swatch our paints and see what they look like on the paper and talk about why to swatch your paints, how to do it, and give you a demonstration. So stay tuned for the next video to keep learning along with me.